Okay. Okay, today we have Craig Hogan. He's been a friend of mine for a long, long time, and he's one of the world's leading experts on the greater reality, death, and afterlife. And he serves as Seek Reality Online Senior Resident Expert. He is the author and co-author and editor, I should say, of 8 books containing information about the life after this life and afterlife communication. And Craig is also the co-founder and president of the 501c3 and non-for-profit Afterlife Research and Education Institute, Incorporated. And for more than a decade, he has headed his own experimental home circle of the Masters of Light. And I've learned so much from Craig. And not only is he a friend, but he's been a mentor. And I'm just so excited that he's here again to speak with us. So, without any further ado, Craig, welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we'll get rid of all those further ados and get going here. Never found a further ado. I don't know where they are, but so we want when I agreed to speak about afterlife experiences, it's a really broad field. There's a lot that's going on that we understand about how people share the experiences of people who are in various circumstances. And the people from the afterlife come in and they will project their thoughts and images to all of the people who are assembled there. So we have a great number of these. I want to talk about 2 of them today. One of them is one that I will begin with that happened to psychotherapists. Psychotherapists had learned how to sit in a room with a patient and put them into a state of mind in which they have an afterlife communication. They're just breathtaking. They're wonderful experiences. Today, there are thousands of psychotherapists who have learned how to do this, and they're very successful at it. It heals grief in this one episode, one session of these induced after death communication experiences. And what they've discovered, though, is there was an incident in which someone was sitting in the room with the psychotherapist and was putting them into this state of mind in which they had the afterlife communications. And the person who was sitting in the room had a shared afterlife communication experience. They shared what was going on. And so I'm going to be sharing that with you. I'm going to be taking these from things that I have online. It's much better for me if I don't speak so much and let you hear from the people who are actually having these experiences. So let me begin by introducing the shared afterlife communication. It's called a shared death experience, or SDE. And what happens in a shared death experience, it's a vision of the dying person. They appear to be alive and well. There they were in the bed, they were decrepit, they were dying, and all of a sudden the people around the bed then see them, a vision of them alive and well, smiling at them. There's a heightened awareness. The people around the bed have an expanded knowledge of what's going on. There are very often encounters with spirit beings, and these are beings who come into the room and they have an angelic presence, and then they will speak to the people in the room, and sometimes it is primarily mental. In other words, they don't hear something; they will get the mental transmissions about what it is that's going on. There is a transcendent light. A light fills the room. That's a very common experience at the very moment when the person transitions from this life into the next. The room is filled with a transcendent light, of just a beautiful light. There's an alteration of time and space. Things happen very quickly, but they seem like they're taking time. And people then may often see the spirit or the soul as it's leaving the body. And that's a part of these experiences, the shared death experiences. They see heavenly realms. So they look off in the distance and they see what looks like a heavenly realm. And these are just people standing around the bed having these experiences. They perceive a boundary that the person who is now making the transition can go across, but they cannot go across. And so they may, at least in a couple of accounts that I know of, that people actually mentally went with the person and into the air, and they were going to go into the boundary, but then when the boundary appeared, they were not able to cross it. They had to come back. There's a strong physical and emotional sensation during this time, and there's an unusual energy that's in the room. There's a feeling of peace and continuity in the room at the time. Sometimes they actually have seen the life review. So they've actually seen the life review the person making the transitions is going through. So they see the various scenes of their life as they're seeing them. There is a feeling of peace and unity, and there is a tunnel or a gateway that they may experience, and there's a difficulty in describing what it is. And so they all who have this shared death experience come away from it saying, I don't know how to say this. I don't know how to speak what I understood, what I felt. It was just beyond words. So all those things are common features of the shared death experience. And so we know that they happen, that they are real experiences. They happen very commonly. And so we get these reports, and the reports are always full of wonderful experiences, and there's a continuity in them. They are sharing the same thing. It's not as though they were so unique that we wouldn't understand that this was a shared death experience. They have the same commonalities. And they can happen either at the bedside or they can happen remotely at some other place. I had a personal experience of, I was told a personal experience by a man whom I know well. And he said that he was driving down the road one evening, and all of a sudden he looked over to the right, and there was his Uncle Neely sitting there. And he had been in the car alone. And his Uncle Neely was sitting there, and he was surprised. He was startled by it because he was divorced from his wife. He hadn't seen her for 7 years. He hadn't seen Uncle Neely for the same time. But he and Uncle Neely and the family used to go to Mass together. And that was the only time that he had spent time with Uncle Neely. And so there's Uncle Neely over there in the passenger side. And so he was startled by it. And he looked over at Uncle Neely, and the Uncle Neely said to him, Mike, the mass is over. Thanks be to God. And of course, it was a joke at the time when he used to go to mass with them. He had converted to Catholicism, but didn't have any real hankering for it. And so then my Uncle Neely had said this often to him as they walked out of the mass. He'd say, "Mike, thank God the mass is over." And so then when he got home after having this experience in the car, he thought he was losing his mind because Uncle Neely disappeared a couple of seconds later. And when he got home and he was sitting in the living room, and his son came into the room and said, Dad, I have bad news. I just got a call from mom, and she had been living on the West Coast. He was on the East Coast. And mom said that Uncle Neely just died. So that was Uncle Neely who had appeared to Mike, even though Mike had not been with him for 7 years. And that's a very common experience. Many people will have those kinds of experiences. So then the other thing that happens is that the experience can happen in the same room. In other words, it isn't at a remote location. The physical distance between the person having the experience and the dying doesn't appear to influence the quality. The quality is the same, whether it's there at the deathbed, whether it's off someplace else when they're having the experience. Most of these experiences happen at the same time as the physical death. About a quarter of them occur a few minutes or hours, and in rare cases, a few days or even weeks before the actual death or after the actual time of death. And it is true that some people will come through, even though they have not died yet, they have not gone out of the body yet. They then are able to appear to people because they're comatose. When a person is comatose, then they are spending more time on the other side than they are here on Earth. They won't be here on Earth unless they're having a dialogue of some sort. But once they're in a coma or they are comatose, then they've already gone on to the other side. So in a few cases, then they actually will appear to the person before the body has died. These last usually a few minutes. They don't usually last hours or longer. Some happen gradually with varying degrees of intensity and happen over days and weeks. The person may keep coming back over and over again over this period of time. Most of these reports have only one living person experiencing it per death. So it's only one person coming in from the afterlife. Sometimes it could be more than one person or several person, but that isn't usually the case. In the cases in which it is more than one person, the person experiencing the shared death experience may report some common features, but in most cases, they report either different features or experiences suggesting a different vantage point, but they all have the same experience. Now, these shared death experiences all have the person on this side of life will have a strong relationship or a bond with the dying person. So it isn't like Elvis appears to somebody someplace, and it's they have to have a bond with the dying person. They identify it as being spiritual, but not religious. They don't identify it as being tied to some religion. There is a value of open-mindedness when a person the person having the shared death experience is more open-minded, then it's easier for this to happen. They accept death as a natural part of life. They don't have the suppositions about death being the end of everything. And so, but they may not experience overwhelming emotions at the time of the death, because of the fact that they may interfere with what's going on, but they are calm, usually don't realize that it's going to be happening, and it just happens all by itself. Now, they're very different from hallucinations. They are not hallucinations. Hallucinations are incoherent, they're fragmented. These are clear, coherent. They're often experienced as being more real than real, is what they say. They happen to unsuspecting caregivers or loved ones or bystanders that are completely healthy in body and mind. They are not subject to hallucinations. These are real experiences by real people who are completely sane. The people having the shared death experience report in the result of them the same things, that they believe that their loved one is alive and well and benevolent and in a benevolent afterlife where they expect to see them again. They've had this experience and it's so life-changing for them that they expect that this is the beginning of their new relationship they're going to be having with them. They believe that on their own death, they will reunite with them. And that's a result of these shared death experiences. Have their fear and anxiety about death alleviated. They feel differently about the end of life, and they've awakened to a new appreciation of the purpose of human life and their own life in general, and the dying person's life. And there is a grief reconciliation process, whereas grief is contextualized and imbued and with an understanding that human death is a transition rather than an end. So it has tremendous effects upon the people who experience these things. And these are consistent among all of the people who have the experiences. They are real experiences. They are not hallucinations. And they are relatively common. Very often people will have them. So what I wanted to do is to share some experiences with you, and I'm going to be sharing the actual recordings of the people speaking about their experiences. Two of these are from a book that I wrote with Dr. Alan Botkin. It's called Induced After-Death Communication. Dr. Botkin was a psychotherapist at the Libertyville, Illinois Veterans Administration Hospital. And he discovered that he could have his patients sitting in his office have afterlife communications with people for whom they were grieving. They're wonderful experiences, and he learned how to do it so that he could do it intentionally. It wasn't something that happened by accident. So he could go into a psychotherapy session. He could have this have them have a near-death experience there, and they would have this experience with their loved one who's living in the afterlife. So two of them are from our book about what happened in each one of these cases. In the first case, This is the case of the psychotherapist who was sitting with Al, and he was working with a patient, and he was putting the patient into a state of mind in which he was going to have an afterlife communication. The person who was with him, the psychotherapist who was with him, learning about having these after death communications, then closed his eyes and he used the same eye movements that put you into that state of mind so that he could relax himself. But as he did that, as he relaxed himself using the eye movements that put people into that state of mind, he shared the experience of the patient who was having this death experience right now, as he was sitting in the psychotherapist's office. And so what I want to do is I want to play this episode for you so you can see what it's like. So I'm going to go ahead and share screen. And once I've got this set up, okay, I'll make sure you can see that. You can see the tiger. This is Alan Botkin. He is the psychotherapist that I had mentioned to you. This is our book, Induced After Death Communication.
When the patient
And if you are interested in it, it is on Amazon. You can get it on Amazon, and we're very happy with the results. It has helped people to understand the fact that we continue to live after the body dies, because even psychotherapists, even people who are highly trained, state licensed, are having these experiences when they induce them within their offices. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play this episode in which Al is with the patient, and the patient is having his own experiences, his afterlife communication experiences with his uncle. And the psychotherapist who's sitting there is going to be reporting what he had happened to him as he was sitting there in the office.
in training was surprised at this coincidence and asked, "Did When the patient opened his eyes after the induced after-death communication, he said he saw a swamp scene. He felt like he was lying in the grass looking at the swamp. The psychotherapist in training was surprised at this coincidence and asked, "Did you see cattails?" The patient said, "Yes," not expecting that to be an unusual statement since he had said it was a swamp. The psychotherapist then said, "Did you see a pond and a willow tree?" The patient was clearly surprised. "Yes," he said. "How did you know that?" The psychotherapist explained what he had done, and the two continued to compare notes with great accuracy between their reports of what they had experienced. Dr. Botkin asked the patient, "Why did you see a swamp?" The patient answered, "The swamp was in the backyard of my uncle's farm. I used to play there and would lie in the grass by the pond." The patient, psychotherapist, and Dr. Botkin sat with wide eyes. They were speechless for some time, simply looking at each other.
That was a wonderful experience in which the psychotherapist was having a shared experience. Now, what that tells us is that when we say that something is mental, we're saying that it's happening within this frame of mind in which we can have things happen. It isn't mental in the sense that it's in our skulls, it isn't in our brains. It is an experience that happens outside of us, and we both participate in it. So that what is happening is they were both participating in being there at that pond with the cattails and having that experience, but the experience was happening within themselves, and it was happening independent of who they were and the fact that they were sitting there. And so then that made it possible for the psychotherapist to have the same experience that the person who was having the induced after death communication was having. So in the second, this is a different variety of the same thing. When Dr. Botkin explained what happened to the other psychotherapists in Libertyville in the Veterans Administration Hospital, one of them was very intrigued, and she decided she was going to try this herself. But what she was going to do is she was going to sit in her office, and she was going to go through the induced after-death communication procedure. During the procedure, the patient closes their eyes, and there's silence for a period of time. It could be a few seconds, it could be even a couple of minutes, or even longer than that. But during that time, the patient is having their afterlife communication experience. The psychotherapist just sits there and waits And then when the patient is done, they open their eyes and they describe what happened during their experience. That's the first the psychotherapist hears about him. So what this person who heard about from Al about what he had been doing in his induced after death communications, she decided what she was going to do was she was going to go into this experience and she was going to have her patient have an induced after death communication. And while his eyes were closed and he was quiet and she was not hearing anything, she was going to close her eyes and induce herself. So what she did was she closed her eyes and she did the eye movements that are part of the process so that she would enter the state of mind after hearing what Al said about the fact that this other psychotherapist had a shared after death communication. And so she did it. And this is the account of what happened when she did that.
After you described to me what had happened with the shared induced after-death communication, I was curious about whether any person present during the patient's induced after-death communication experience might share the induced after-death communication, including the psychotherapist. So I decided to give it a try. I was working with a patient who had both traumatic images and grief from a war experience. He was hoping to have an after-death communication with one of the soldiers he had seen die during a fierce battle. I administered a set of eye movements, and he closed his eyes. At the same time, I closed my eyes and moved them. What I experienced was incredible. I wasn't trying to experience anything, but very vivid scenes of a soldier in a peaceful green valley started coming to me. I could sense that he was communicating and saying, "It's all right. It wasn't your fault." I opened my eyes after a short time to be sure I was watching my patient when he opened his. Soon after he opened his eyes, he told me I saw him. It was really him. He said not to keep feeling bad. It wasn't my fault. Well, I was pretty stunned, but I stayed with it. "Describe what you saw," I said, really curious to see what he would describe. "What was the scenery like?" he said to me, and these were his words. "It was a beautiful, lush, green place with slight rises on either side, like a valley." I kept my composure, and we finished the session. I wasn't willing to tell him what had just happened, and now that I know what can happen, I won't do it again without talking to the patient about it first. But someone really has to study this.
These are wonderful experiences. And the psychotherapists are able to do this very easily. And they can do it anytime they wish. Most of them don't do it because of the fact that they're focusing upon the patient, but they can have a shared experience anytime that they want to. So that's the first type of shared after-death communication experience. The next is going to be narrated by Raymond Moody. If you know anything about Raymond Moody, he's the author of books about the afterlife and afterlife communication. And Raymond then was having an interview in which he described shared death experiences. Now, these are experiences in which the person is going through the process of transitioning into the next life. And as they're transitioning, the people in the room may have an experience. Could be an individual, could be a number of people. It could be any of those characteristics that I had listed before. And so this is going to be Raymond Moody. He's going to be talking about what happened in the shared death experiences. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to share screen again here. And you'll recognize Raymond Moody, and he will be talking about what happened during.
When my mother died, my wife and I and my sister and one of my brothers-in-law had a shared death experience. It was incredible. I just don't have the words to describe what this was like. My sister said that she felt the presence of my father, who had died 18 months before, there in the room. But my experience was, again, it was like an impossible to describe change of geometrical arrangement. It was like suddenly I was no longer in a three-dimensional space, but I was in if you can imagine, two funnels joined at the narrow point, so that you're in this kind of hourglass-like configuration of space. It's very hard to describe, where there's a kind of dynamism, and the light is totally different. You have to say light because that's the closest thing to it, but it's some other kind of energy, I guess, and filled the room.
So what he's describing is what's common with these shared after-death communication experiences. People very often have a sense of a brilliant light in the room. Something's changed in the room. They can feel it energetically. It feels very positive, and it even feels as it does in a near-death or an afterlife communication, in which somebody has a sense of God being there. And so then this wonderful experience is what Raymond Moody is describing. He then has these experiences, and he described them in his book Reunions. And I think what I want to do now is I want to go into more extensive descriptions of it by a man named William Peters. He is a psychotherapist. He's in Los Angeles. And William has had these experiences, and he wanted to study more about them. So he learned more about the shared death experience, and eventually then he formed an organization that is focused upon shared death experiences, what happens when a person has these experiences. And so he has this organization out in California now, and I'd invite any of you to take a look at the organization. But his name is William Peters. What I'm going to do is I'm going to have him describe what he has discovered, what they have discovered about these shared death experiences as a result of their research.
Light, because that's the closest.
Roughly 2/3 happen remotely. There are subcategories or subtypes for shared death experiences. There are variations in time. That means we have about 9% of SDEs will happen either, moments, hours, in very few cases, even up to a day in advance of the actual moment of death. About 14% will happen few, minutes, hours, up to a day or two, sometimes longer, with after the death of their loved one. So that's 23%, almost a quarter, will happen not exactly at the time of, medically determined human death, which is cessation of heart and brainwaves, or brainwaves, I should say. But we also have a gradual SDE. A gradual SDE is something that kind of continues over a longer period of time. So you'll be in this altered state of mind where you may be in a heavenly realm, or you may see a life review, or you may be in conversation with the conductor or other elevated beings. And these experiences can arise, then go away, and then you can find yourself back there again. So it's like you enter into this after this SDE experience dimension, and then you kind of go back to your own life for a bit, and then you're back there again. And that's about 4 or 5%. So it's very rare, not very rare, it's just not common. But, I had that when my father died, because when my father died, just about 20 minutes before he died, I saw my grandmother, deceased grandmother, deceased aunt, and my deceased grandfather. And then I sensed and felt the conductor. And then there was some commotion around the exact time my father died. And so I kind of came out of that state. And I also had my hand on his pulse, and his pulse stopped. So I woke up my eyes and I said, I think he's died. And my siblings and mother were there. And then everyone left the room because, within 20 minutes, my mother had said, he's gone. And, my siblings said the same thing. But I stayed with my father's body until the morticians came to collect his body. And about 40 minutes after he died, I was just, with his body alone and talking to him as if he was there. And praying and wishing him well. And then all of a sudden, I saw life review. I went into this place, this other dimension, and all of a sudden I saw our entire life together. Not entire, but key snippets that I remember, some of which I remembered and some of which I did not remember. Like some of it, I could say, oh, that was in my memory. Some of it, I had no idea. That memory has never come to me before, but I know where that is. I kind of know that time frame. And so I kind of felt that either my father was giving that to me, or some, maybe the conductor, or some benevolent force was showing me these film snippets, if you will, these images of our life together. So you asked about type. So there's that's a gradual SD I had my father. The second subtype is what we call multi-person. That means more than one person can share in the SDE. So you can imagine someone's dying and there's 3 or 4 loved ones at the bedside. Then more than one person has a shared death experience. They often have some same experience features, but they also have some different features as well. So in other words, maybe one of the loved ones will see a deceased relative. Someone else will say, oh, I had a life review. Or someone else will say, oh, I saw the light in the distance and I saw, dad moving towards it. So, and then someone can say, well, we were all felt the energy. That's really the most important thing is here. There's an energetic feeling. We all felt the sublime feelings. We all felt the strong energy. We all felt the sense of belonging and connectedness and otherworldliness. This is when it gets ineffable. And that feature, I should say, is common in about 36 to 38% of our cases. This sense of sublime feelings that are otherworldly and ineffable. So that's one basic typology. But then we have this more evolved or more in-depth typology that I came up with because I really wanted to help experiencers know and other people know what this experience is. So we call this the mode of participation, and there's 4 of them. The most basic mode of participation is what is referred to as sensing at a distance. So you're not at the bedside. And by the way, these modes are not mutually exclusive, so you can have more than one of them. So in this type of experience, you sense some sort of dying phenomena at a distance. So you might feel or sense your loved one. You might have strong empathic feelings for the loved ones. What you don't have here is you don't actually see or witness the shared death and near-death phenomena that are associated with death, but you have strong sensations that lead you to believe something's going on here. And they tend to happen at the time or soon after the time of death of your loved one. Then you have a second mode of participation, which is witnessing or observing death-related phenomena. And these are the phenomena that we've already discussed about, heavenly realms, out-of-body experience, past life reviews, heavenly realms, seeing, elevated spirit beings, seeing deceased loved ones, a tunnel, moving towards the light, all this. If you have those, we call those witnessing or observing death-related phenomena. And that's mode of participation number 2. Mode of participation number 3 is accompanying the dying. And that's when you go with the dying, you progress on the journey, you see these same phenomena in modes of participation 2, but rather than just watching the phenomena from a static position, you're moving along and observing with the dying. The 4th and least common is what we call assisting and guiding. So the experiencer will say, it was like I was called into this dying, this transition of my loved one to assist or guide my loved one. And we see this in about 6% of our cases. But when it happens, it's profound, because I got one example that sticks out to me is Mark is in New Jersey, which is outside New York, in the East Coast of the United States. And he has just finished a week-long outdoor education training that he was teaching. So he's exhausted. So he's driving back to his home in the country, and he's in the passenger seat. His buddy is driving. And this is also interesting because he's in the passenger seat, and he's got, when you're in a passenger seat of a car and it's, in the evening and you're tired, you have a very open mind. You have a very open mind. We call this kind of flow state. Like he's just there, mind very open, very spacious. Well, his father is dying in a hospital in Canada, but he doesn't know that he's dying. He knows that he's in the hospital, but he doesn't know how close to death he is. So what Mark describes is he's in the passenger seat of the car, and then all of a sudden he finds himself with his father in another dimension, and his father's confused. And and Mark shows up, and Mark realizes instantly, oh my gosh, my father's died. He's there with me. He goes, Dad, I see you're confused. Do you know you've died? And he says, oh, that's what's happening. He goes, well, I can help you. You need to turn and go to the light. He goes, well, how? And so Mark says he picks up his father and says, I'll take you. And so then Mark describes carrying his father, who he describes as being light as a waif. And his father was a big man. So he picks up his father and he carries him upwards. Once again, the theme of ascension and journey and progression are the elements we see that characterize this experience. So he carries his father upwards, and then in the distance, he sees Mark sees his grandmother, his father's mother, appear coming out of the light, out of an arch of glaring light. And Mark sets his father down, and his father goes into the arms of his mother, and Mark feels the love pouring out, kind of the weeping, the longing, the love requited, the connection. And then Mark sees his father's brother appear, Mark's uncle, and they all embrace. And Mark knows at this point that he's done his job. He's assisted his father in getting to where he needs. And then there's one last exchange between Mark and his father. His father turns back and says, thank you. I didn't know how to do this. Thank you for helping me. And then all three of Mark's relatives, father, grandmother, and uncle, rise up and go into the light and disappear. And Mark returns to his car ride.
So that was a wonderful experience. That is William Peters. William Peters is the founder of the Shared Crossing Project. If you want to look at that on Amazon, it's called the Shared Crossing Project. And they're actually having conferences about shared crossings. And so you can go there to learn more about them. But I would invite you to do that. If you wanted to look at that, I'm going to share screen again. I'll show you what his website looks like.
Craig, you got about 5 minutes left.
Okay.
Thanks.
So this is his website. It's at sharedcrossing.com. And you can get on there, and he has many more stories. They describe what is going to be going on. They're having an NDE symposium. He's doing this in connection with IAD. Well, he's doing it in connection with the other organizations that are doing this work. So I would invite you to take a look at that if you have a chance. And what I want to do now is I want to stop and ask you if you have any other if you have any questions about what I have given to you, and I will answer them, or I would invite anybody who's had experiences of shared death experiences to describe what happened with you during your shared death experience. So what I'll do is